Thank you, Ken. I'm going to try to tame this mic today and not get too close. If I do, just raise your hand, or they'll come down and warn us. I'm going to try to condense a 93-page report into about 35 minutes. Now, if I run out of soap, I've got Bob Brown primed. He's going to take over, so there's no problem on that side. But Ken has asked me to help you understand the purpose of our Call General Conference that will be in February of 2019. It will be one of the most significant conferences I think that the United Methodist Church has had since its division of the North and South and many other events that's taken place in our history. This report that will be given at this conference was a report from a commission that was appointed by the bishops following the 2016 General Conference after a lengthy discussion on the floor of the subject of homosexuality. A 34-member commission was appointed, people of all persuasions and people both lay and clergy. My lesson will be purely informative today. I will also build some history into it, but I will try to help you understand these plans that have been proposed by this 34-member commission and how it might shape our church for the future. Now, I want to assure you that this will not be a lesson wherein I support any of these three plans. You will not know where I stand on them, but you will be able to make your own decision. But my purpose is to help you understand the issues and the history and the proposals that will drastically affect our church. Now let me begin with a little history before I get into the understanding of these proposed plans. We go back in this history all the way to 1972. At the 1972 General Conference, a member of that conference, who was from the Southwest Texas Conference, that is now known as the Rio, Texas Conference, stood up and made a motion on the floor that led to the following statements in the Book of Discipline. Now, I'm going to read these three statements. They're not very long, or three, well, they are statements, but they have a lot more with them. But I'll just read the aspects that, as it relates to homosexuality. The first one comes from the Social Principles, and it says, the United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers the practice incompatible with the Christian teachings. Now, all of this came out of the motion of this one person on the floor of the conference. The second is really from the section of our discipline that has to do with ordained clergy. The practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teachings. Therefore, self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church. And then the third that is in our discipline is this, and this relates to the ceremonies within our church. Ceremonies that celebrate homosexual union shall not be conducted by our ministers and shall not be conducted in our churches. Now those were the statements that came out of this 1972 General Conference. Now since that time, the General Conference has entertained motions every year, every 4 years. And it's addressed this very subject. And we as a General Church have voted on it every year. The first time we voted on it, which was 4 years after it was established, the vote to uphold that motion was 765 to 225. Now that was back in the late 70s. In the more recent years, a recent vote before our last General Conference, there was a difference in those who wanted to keep those statements and those who wanted not to keep them of less than 100 votes. So you can see the whole thing has swung in terms of the persuasion of those of the General Conference. In the General Conference of 2016, the delegates were poised to take another vote. I was there at that conference, and I was sitting up on the stage with all the other bishops like potted plants. That's about what we are in those conferences. We chair the meetings, but we cannot speak, and we cannot make any motions. So I told Zoe I'm a potted plant. That's about it. But anyway, when a motion was made, or we were poised to take a vote, and before this vote was taken, the bishops offered a proposal. And that proposal was to appoint a commission that was called the Way Forward. Now this had to be a motion that was made from the floor, but it was at least identified with the bishop's idea. And this would be made up of 34 people of all opinions who would study the United Methodist position for a period of 2 years and then come back and report it to the church. The motion, or the action on this motion, was approved 428 to 405. Now, we do not know what would happen if we had taken another vote on the issue at that time, but the conference decided that we would stand back and we would try to study it as a church. Now, after almost meeting for 2 years, reporting the minutes and issues of every meeting back to the bishops, the commission has now offered plans to be considered by this called General Conference. Now, I want to stress that in the organization of the commission that the bishops and the General Conference were trying to create, they were trying to hear all of the opinions of the church. They were trying to not fight each other, but listen to each other. The greatest story of the United Methodist Church is that we're able to work together, that we're able to love each other in the midst of our differences. The United Methodist Church is about unity and diversity.
Amen.
And that has always been the driving force of the United Methodist Church. The bishops and commissions knew that this work would not be easy, but we have a choice. We had a choice of approaching the subject either with a heart of war or a heart of peace. And we are praying then, and we're hoping that the Holy Spirit will lead our church so that we might experience the gift of new life at the end of this 2019 General Conference, and ultimately helping us find the will of God and the grace of God. Now, I want to share with you the 3 plans that will be before this General Conference. And these 3 plans have come out of this commission on the way forward. Now, the first plan is called the One Church Plan. This plan provides a generous unity that gives churches and pastors the flexibility to uniquely function in the context of their convictions. It recognizes that one size does not fit all in our complex and diverse world. Now, this plan maintains the leadership of the structure of the United Methodist Church. It does not disrupt that, including the Council of Bishops, the General Conference, and the Annual Conference as a one body and one church. It offers the freedom to many who desire to change, but do not want to violate the Book of Discipline. In this plan, there is no mandate that requires local churches or conferences or pastors to participate in a vote that divides, segments, or separates. The plan grants conservatives the right to continue to offer ministry as they have in the past, and space for progressives to exercise freely a more complete ministry with LGBTQ persons. Now, this one church plan moves the prohibitive language that I read to you a moment ago from the discipline. It removes all of that. And it has been used to restrict pastors and churches in their activity. It adds language that protects the religious freedom of pastors and churches in conference, both those who choose to marry and ordain homosexuals and those who choose not to. Now let me read a paragraph from this commission report. It says, the one church plan gives churches the room they need to maximize the presence of the United Methodist Church witness in as many places in the world as possible. While some annual conferences and boards of ordained ministries can adopt new practices, no annual conference must make further choices or amend current practices unless they desire to do so. It will not, therefore, interrupt any mission work of the United Methodist Church that is related to our universities, our foundations, our agencies, and our general boards. Now, 18 of the 34 commissions on the way members of the commission on the way forward supported this plan. 18 of the 34. 2/3 or more of the bishops of the United Methodist Church supported this plan. An overwhelming number of people from Africa are members of the United Methodist Church. They do not support removing any of the verbiage on homosexuality. The Africans represent a contextual understanding of what it means in this particular aspect of our church and our particular personhood as a Christian. Now, they represent a great number in the church. And whenever we vote at General Conference, their vote has a determining factor. Now, this plan is an attempt to give them permission to function with their beliefs in the context of their sociological beliefs and location. In summary, the One Church plan gives permission for conferences, churches, and pastors to act as their conscience dictates. Pastors will be assigned to conferences that have the theological beliefs that they have. Churches will identify with conferences that have their theological beliefs. And there will be a great effort to match all of these together. Now, I can say a lot more about this process, but I don't have time to do that. I just want to get you to have a basic understanding of the One Church plan. It basically says that people can respond to their own personal convictions in the United Methodist Church and act upon them. Now, the second plan is called the Connectional Conference Plan. Now, this plan would allow annual conference to choose among 3 large connectional conferences. These would be like our jurisdictional conferences. Right now, we have 5 jurisdictional conferences. We have one central conference. The central conference is like a jurisdictional conference, but it includes the churches of Africa, Europe, and the Philippines. Now, the jurisdictional conferences have about 8 or 9 states in them. And those states make up the membership of a jurisdictional conference. Now, after January 1st, 2026, annual conferences under this plan. I think I'm getting some water, and I appreciate it. Thank you. I'll take it.
Thanks, Jerry.
After the connectional conferences are organized in this plan, there will be the assignment of churches and of well, not jurisdiction, but churches and conferences according to their theological persuasion on this issue. Any local church between August the 1st, 2026 and July 2022 may make a decision to join one of the three existing connectional conferences. Now, after that 1 month, then they will have to remain in the conference that they are in, or the connectional conference that they are in, and they cannot change unless, except in every 4 years. Every 4 years they can make the change. Now, any local church between that month, though, and conference can make a change by a majority vote. Okay, I could say some more about that, but let's leave it there. Now, the episcopal oversight and accountability in election and assignments and funding would occur within these connectional conferences, these three connectional conferences. They would be electing bishops, and they would be the primary missional organizations of the United Methodist Church. It's likely that the general conference, the central conference, would make up one connectional conference. It's likely that the other two connectional conferences would exist within the United States. And they would be identified by one or the other persuasion or opinion on this particular issue. Clergy would choose to affiliate with the connectional conference that they feel comfortable with. Boards of ordained ministries would define the expectation of the connectional conference and hold clergy accountable for their defined theology of that conference. Clergy ordination would be organized by all three connectional conferences. Any vote of an annual conference to realign or have a different connectional conference would occur every 4 years. Now, congregations may vote to withdraw from or remain within an annual conference, or they may vote to withdraw from the United Methodist Church and unite with an autonomous affiliated concordant church. If they withdraw, they will have the responsibility of pension liabilities, and the same with clergy and bishops. Now, the plan received a very low support. This plan received a very low support in the commission, but there was enough support to make it one of the plans presented. In the Council of Bishops, it had a very low support. When I say low, probably 3 or 4. Now, I don't want to say that to persuade you as to what you are for, but I just wanted you to know the flavor of understanding and support that these plans have within these decision-making bodies. Now, the third one. The third plan is called the traditional plan. Now, this traditional plan is a lot like we now have it, except there are a few new changes. The traditional plan received intensive and comprehensive participation. I didn't mean to say that. Whereas the connectional plan and the one church plan received a lot of discussion. The traditional plan came at a late stage, and the bishops were not able really to go into as many discussions about that particular plan. But it had enough support that we felt like, and the commission felt like, that it had to be one of the plans presented. Now, let me give you a summary of just what the discipline of the traditional plan would support. They would broaden the definition of self-avowed practicing homosexuals to include persons living in a same-sex marriage or civil union, or persons who publicly state that they are practicing homosexuals. They would mandate that any just resolution shall include a commitment not to repeat the offense. They would require every annual conference to certify that they will uphold, enforce, and maintain the discipline standards of LGBTQ marriage and ordination. The annual conferences that did not so certify that they would support these discipline standards that would not be changed, as I read them earlier. Those conferences that did not so certify would be encouraged to form something similar to autonomous affiliated concordant church. As of 2021 annual conferences who could not do so would certify they could no longer use the United Methodist name and logo, and they could no longer receive funds from the United Methodist Church. The fifth identifying factor is they would require bishops, active and retired, to certify that they will uphold, enforce, and maintain the discipline standards on LGBTQ marriage and ordination. The discipline standards that I just read to you. Active bishops who did not so certify would not be eligible to receive compensation for expenses in 2021 and would be encouraged to join an autonomous affiliated concordant church. Now, this plan maintains the current stance of the church regarding the definition of marriage and ministry of and with LGBTQ persons. It flows from the presupposition that the United Methodist Church ought to have one unified moral stance on the issues of marriage and homosexuality. The Knot model continues to affirm the welcome of gay persons into the membership of the church, sacraments and baptism, but it supports the discipline as it now stands. Okay, now those are the three plans. The first, kind of a cross between progressives and those who want to not quite go as far as removing all of the, well, it would remove all the statements, but the first one is more a progressive stance. The second is more of a, I don't know, it's one that I can't even quite understand yet. And the third one is more of a conservative stance.
Joe,
Now, yes, Ken?
how much support did Pastor Irvin get?
In the Council of Bishops, it did not get a lot. It was not really, it did not have a lot of discussion because it came into the council late. So I can't give you a definitive number that supported that. And I don't know in the commission, it had enough support in the commission that we thought, or they thought, that it had to be a third plan. Now, let me ask you to hold your questions here until I get to the end, and then we'll give you, I want to be sure that I cover all of this. Okay, now, I've given you the plans, but I want to tell you another possibility that could happen. What happens if all of these plans are voted down? Then where is the church going to be? Well, I've heard that there is some discussion that there could be another proposal, which would be called simple proposals. The first one would simply say, get rid of all of the restrictive language in the discipline. Keep the discipline as it is, and vote to go on. The other plan would be a simple plan. Keep all of the restrictive language in the discipline. Keep everything else as it is, and vote to go on. Now, maybe the bishops have made it too complicated. But in a way, I don't know which way these other simple plans would go. It would fall strictly on the representation of the general church. And I want you to know that without the African presence, the restrictive language probably would have been removed. So there's a lot of conservative presence and support in African delegations. And they represent folks, a very large percent of our church. Now, I want to talk to you about 3 bumps along the way. First of all, there's going to be the bump of the Judicial Council that has been asked, that has been asked to clarify what can come on the floor of this call General Conference. Now, only the thing that can be discussed on the call General Conference in 2019 is what was stated as the purpose of that conference. And the bishops, not the bishops, but the Judicial Council said, as long as a business proposed to be transacted in such a petition on the floor of the conference is in harmony with the stated purpose of the call General Conference, it may be considered. That means you can't get into all this other business in that discussion. It's only going to discuss the report of the commission on the way forward. Now, another bump coming from judicial issue, in October 2018, the Judicial Council has been requested by the bishops to rule whether or not any of these 3 plans are constitutional. Now, if they rule that one of them's constitutional, the other 2 are not, then you'll vote on only one. If they say they're all non-constitutional, you won't have anything to vote on. So in October of 2018, there's going to be a very important decision made by the Judicial Council. Now, the other last bump, although there was a large, okay, this isn't significant, but there was a concern, and I think the misconception among a lot of our church, that the report coming out of to the 2019 General Conference would be the report of the bishops after they heard the report of the Way Forward Commission. That is not true. The Judicial Council ruled that there is nothing in the proceedings of the 2016 General Conference suggesting that the Commission on the Way Forward was supposed to submit its recommendations to the Council of Bishops. So in other words, the Council of Bishops will not have anything to do with recommending which of the plans they support. It will come directly from the Commission on the Way Forward. Now, I have been true to my 35 minutes. This summary, I hope, will give you some insight into what is happening. Any decision is likely to bring some departure of membership. I think it could go either way. We can only pray that the Holy Spirit will lead our church and lead United Methodist into a unity in the midst of our diversity. And that's all we can pray for. But our church is facing some very difficult days ahead in these considerations. Now, I'll entertain any questions.
Thank you so much for bringing clarity to what is a very complex issue and a very long report. And you did a splendid job. We all appreciate the time you put in to summarize.
Thank you, Gary.
One question that I had, Bishop Joe, is that the first way, does that allow to get around some of the regional concerns? Because it was my understanding from what the Council of 2016, that a lot of the Africans' concern were monogamy and other issues that they had to deal with. Is the first proposal one that would then allow the different sections of the earth to determine what's best in their region?
It would allow the conference and the, yes, in their region, the conference, the church, and the jurisdiction to decide what is best.
But
Now,
would
in terms, I'm sorry,
but would it allow them to keep the same language in the discipline and the
no,
language?
in the first plan, the language would be eliminated.
But they could still
Yeah.
enforce it with them.
They, yes, they could act upon their conscientious convictions in the conference, in the church, but they would not be determined, it would not be determined by the prohibitive language that we have now. That will all be eliminated.
One last question. The third plan, am I understanding it correctly, that the third plan would mean no change in anything in the discipline, and any group or organization that does not adhere to it is going to lose their credentials as United Methodist?
Yeah, the third plan is like we have now, but it's a little more restrictive in what will happen. And it's a plan that is a little more judgmental. As to if you don't represent what I believe in this particular theological interpretation, then you're out of here. Because we will not ordain your ministers, and we will not let you be a part of the conference.
What is the Judicial Council?
The Judicial Council, in the United Methodist Church, the Judicial Council is elected by the General Conference every 4 years. It's a group of about 11 members elected out of all of the membership of the general delegation. And the Judicial Council decides on questions like these. There's a lot of other things that come before the Judicial Council. It often decides on legalistic charges that are made against pastors. It often interprets the discipline. That's the primary duty of the Judicial Council, and that is to interpret the discipline. But it is elected democratically by the church.
Yes, sir, Joe, I have an observation and a comment, and a question more or less. The statements don't address the issue of matrimony directly. The third statement sort of skirts around it in terms of holding services which could relate to that. The third traditional plan definitely speaks to it. Can you clarify that? The issue of matrimony?
Yes. Well, that would only be, well, of course you could not unite people in the third plan. In the first plan, you could, if your particular conference or your church says that they agree with that kind of marriage.
And what constitutes constitution, whether it's in accordance with the Constitution, what is the Constitution of the Methodist Church?
Well, the Constitution is in the Book of Discipline, and it really has to do with the organization and the whole governance of the church. I tell you, I'll talk with you about that later, but it's a bit too long to get into, but it defines essentially what the church feels. Just like the Constitution of the United States, it decides the principles and defines the principles and the organization of the church.
Joe?
Yes.
Let's assume that the Judicial Council says all three of these are acceptable. Y'all vote on them in St. Louis in February.
Yes.
February comes, they need no majority. None of the three plans gets, if I understand, we're going to have 50%.
No, the plans will be voted on separately.
Yeah, but I mean,
See, we will not have three plans before us. There will be a proposal for one plan, and that will be accepted or rejected.
can you have the two plans
Then there'll be
approved?
another plan. If you're in favor of the one church plan, it will come before you. If you vote on that one church plan, the other plans are negated.
Okay, let's assume none of the three get a majority.
Yeah.
Then what happens? Kick the can down the road to 2020 when they meet again?
Well, yes, if those plans are not, and that's the only thing that this conference will be authorized to consider, the report of the Commission on the Way Forward, which includes the 3 plans. And if none of those 3 plans are accepted, then we will function by the present word in the discipline, and it will go on until the next general conference. And then there will be an awful lot of floor discussion.
Is this a called special conference? It's
Yes.
not a regular 4-year?
That's right. The conference, the general conference, meets every 4 years. But this is a call conference meeting 2 years after the general conference that met in 2016.
Well,
Yes.
will it be, as stated, a simple majority?
A simple majority, yes, is usually, unless it's defined differently by the rules of the general conference. But usually in this, it is a simple majority.
Thank you.
Bishop,
Okay?
what chance do you think that the Africans would support, what chance do you think that the Africans would support the first plan? You just have your opinion.
I don't have an opinion on that. I can only say that there were people in the Council of Bishops, those are the only ones I've had in contact with. And there are many of the bishops who are persuaded to support a more progressive understanding. But they are influenced by their constituency, and that's their conferences. Now you remember, I don't want to say this in any kind of, well, I won't say it then. Yes.
What are the repercussions of the African Church withdrawing from the United Methodist Church?
Those are the possibilities of any church or any conference. If that withdrawal takes place, they would set up another church, but there's a lot of liabilities in those withdrawals. The liabilities of property, the liabilities of pensions, the liabilities of a lot of things that exist now in the United Methodist Church that they'll have to, like an independent church, go out and create. And many of their members that will not go with them, they'll continue, it'll be a split.
Joe, how many people are you expecting at this in St. Louis? How many people
The
will be
general
there voting?
conference is made up of about 870 or so. Now remember, the general conference are members that you have had, maybe not individually, but you've had a part in our democratic process of election. The person you elect to go to annual conference elects the people who go to the general conference. The annual conference elects the general conference representatives. And they are the ones that are going to be making this decision. Let's go back with, okay, then Bruce had his hand.
Well, I'm curious, what are other churches, are they having the same national?
Yes. I'm glad you asked that. Yes, the Presbyterians and the Episcopalians have already gone through this battle. And the Episcopal, I met with an Episcopal priest not long ago, and he said, we have lost a number of members, but it has not killed the church. And they have gone on in the, well, their majority was that they would not observe any of these restrictions. And by doing that, they've lost a good bit of membership. But they have gone on with that kind of conviction within their church. Now, I don't know enough about the Presbyterian, but they have also had their fight over this. Yes, John?
That's my understanding from what you said, that all 3 plans have passed the Methodist legal beagles such that there would be no possibility a district judge to rule whatever is unconstitutional?
No, that's what we're asking the Judicial Council to rule, whether or not all of the 3 plans are constitutional. And we will know that decision in October. Now, I would think that, there's a lot of legal minds and a lot of consideration in the bishops and in the way forward. I'm going to be very surprised if the Judicial Council comes back and says, no, you cannot consider one of these three plans or any of them. I personally think that this is just covering their tracks to ask the Judicial Council to affirm it. Because they've already looked at the Constitution, they've already considered that. Well, my time is at an end. I don't see any other hands. If you have any questions, you want to... Thank you.